talking about the possession movie Pray for the Devil, which is also known as The Devil's Light, and this is directed by Daniel Stam, and it stars Jacqueline Byers as a young novice nun. We've also got a few recognisable names here. We've got Ben Cross in his final role, who sadly passed away 10 days after this movie was wrapped filming. We've also got supporting roles here from genre favourites Virginia Madsen and Colin Salmon. So what's the story? Yes, it's another exorcism possession movie. We've seen plenty of those. This one has tries to have the unique selling point that it is portraying the first female exorcist. Although it doesn't actually. There's actually been at least one more movie that kind of has that premise. The 2021's The Last Exorcist, I believe, that had more or less the same premise. But anyway, I digress. This is a medium budget movie. This actually got a kind of a cinema release, so it does have more production value than the one I've just mentioned. The story is as follows. So we basically follow this trainee nun as she's kind of in this institution which is ultimately there to prepare priests to become exorcists, to defeat the forces of evil wherever they might find it. And the reason we're told this is the case is because there have been more demonic possessions reported every year, and that's the Vatican is trying to train kind of more priests to be able to deal with it. So this nun is kind of working there as a kind of more of a carer for people who may be afflicted with demonic possession and things like this. But our nun has actually had some kind of experience herself where her mother may well have been possessed while she was a child, and that such attracts the attention of demonic entities, and thus becomes really the kind of the first female to kind of get indoctrinated into kind of more a formal training of exorcism and kind of things like this. And this kind of annoys some people, but ultimately will lead to a face-off with a demonic force. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what I think works with this movie. So as I've mentioned, this one was a cinema release, and as such it has a little bit more of a higher production value than some of the straight to kind of VOD and DVD releases. You've got a few recognisable faces here, but just the general kind of production value, better locations, kind of more extras, things like this, I think give it this kind of slightly kind of more kind of polished feel than kind of the some of its kind of more low budget kind of contemporary. So it does have a somewhat more of a polished feel to it. I have seen some critiques of the acting. I didn't have a problem with it. I actually think the acting here was all fine. I mean, some of the dialogue gets a little hokey here and there, but for the most part I think the acting here was perfectly fine. And Jacqueline Byers, who plays our main protagonist, this kind of trainee nun, I thought did a good job, and her character seems down to earth and kind of sympathetic, and I feel a character you can kind of root behind. The story is, I won't lie to you, it's kind of a little bit kind of obvious and kind of like generic, to be fair, but I will say it's still an engaging story. I think the story is reasonably well paced with kind of a few kind of scares and kind of set pieces as the kind of the film progresses to kind of keep you interested. I did actually kind of like the way that, and I'll come on to why I think this is important in a minute, but our female main character is not a Mary Sue. She fails and learns from her mistakes within this kind of movie, and I think that was quite important, to be honest, because I feel, having a character which is the first female exorcist, it's important that she's not kind of like, I'm just amazing at everything, from the first kind of few moments and stuff. Although I will say, I'm going to talk about that again in maybe what doesn't work. But yeah, I think it was probably handled reasonably well, to be honest. I think the technical elements here are solid. Like the cinematography, I think is fantastic. The location shooting here with these kind of gothic kind of statues of angels kind of fighting demons in this architecture. The location shooting I thought was excellent here. And I think it does give you this wider mythology. We feel like this is the first step in kind of, the forces of evil trying to take hold of mankind and what's going to kind of happen next and things like that. So I thought that it had this kind of level of seriousness which I kind of quite enjoyed. And like I've said I think generally speaking it was a somewhat kind of entertaining movie. Now, maybe what doesn't work, I don't think this really breaks any kind of like barriers in regards to kind of storytelling here. It's very much a run-of-the-mill kind of possession exorcism movie that kind of leans on more schlock maybe than kind of genuine kind of like scares maybe. We get plenty of jump scares in the movie, and I thought some of them are quite good, but it does feel a little bit schlocky at times, relying a little too heavily on the kind of the jump scare aspect rather than kind of build up genuine kind of tension. There are a few things here that worked for me, but for the most part I think it kind of rested on kind of easier kind of like scares to be honest with you. This is a small thing, but I am going to mention it. The choice here to make our nun character a bottle blonde was an odd one. Jacqueline Byers has naturally kind of like mousy kind of brown hair. Why she's a bleach blonde nun in this, I don't know. It just seems an odd choice for a nun. It might sound small and insignificant, but I found it a little distracting. I can only guess that they didn't want her to look too mousy, and they wanted her to look a little bit more kind of attractive, to be honest, and not obviously so, you know, nunny, I guess. But I don't know. It seemed an odd decision to me. Are nuns? I mean, I don't know any nuns. Do they bleach their hair often? Weird. It just looked odd. So I think one thing that this movie kind of attempted, and I don't know if this was necessarily on purpose, was to kind of challenge gender stereotypes and things like this by having this our main character, a nun, challenge the institution to become the first female exorcist, and then immediately try to do things a different way to than the kind of the patriarch or the church in this case had been doing for hundreds of years. And she wanted to do exorcisms in a different way. And had this movie been a bigger hit, I felt that may have been in the kind of the headlines more. Because this movie somewhat went under the radar, I don't think it's really kind of riled up the kind of like the usual kind of suspects who maybe have jumped all over this. I will say that although I don't think it was necessary to bring this really to kind of the forefront, they do make it clear that she's not completely right, and you know, her way of doing things maybe could work in tandem with maybe the traditional kind of style, but she's not exactly right, and she does fail, and she does have to kind of like pivot somewhat. But it seemed like an odd choice to bring it up. I mean, I guess you want to have this, you know, the point of having a female, you know, the first female exorcism in the movie, which was okay. But then the choice here to go, well, actually, I think the way you've been doing it is wrong, and this is the better way of doing it, I think maybe could push people's buttons if they're so inclined. It just seemed like an inclusion here that would deliberately kind of push buttons to me. I don't know if that was an intention. They didn't go as far with it as I think they could have done, which is probably a good idea. But it seemed like an unnecessary kind of like political kind of layer, which, you know, I wish movies would, unless it's actually specifically about that, maybe they would try and stay away from, to be honest with you, because ultimately, in this day and age, it ends up never really kind of going well, does it? It always ends up causing arguments. Like I said, had this movie, I think, been a bigger movie, had more of a kind of an impact on kind of the pop culture zeitgeist, maybe kind of people would care more, but as such, it's kind of really somewhat stuck without a kind of a trace. I will say as well, some of the kind of the CGI elements here are weak, considering I think the strong production value in the cinematography, the location shooting, having some sort of like recognisable actors here, made the movie look like it was, you know, had somewhat some decent production value, but some quite poor CGI at times kind of did undercut it. I mean, there's quite a lot of it. We did see quite a lot of effects here. Some of them I think work okay. There's a couple of like body crunching ones where people are kind of contorting, which I think did okay, but you know, we get the kind of CGI hair, CGI kind of like white on the eyes and things like that didn't look particularly strong, and I think could have been maybe done better with kind of practical effects, which I know take longer, which I think is the issue these days. But there you go. Overall, I think this movie is an entertaining movie. I don't think it's particularly groundbreaking in any way. I think it kind of rests on its laurels somewhat, and ultimately becomes a little bit of a generic movie, and with kind of some sloppy CGI, but it's still an entertaining movie. I think the movie's quite well paced. The demons seem genuinely kind of dangerous. The demons do kill people in this movie, and it does seem to point to a kind of a larger threat. So overall, I think this movie maybe is an entertaining film, but is on its critical and kind of like you know, artistic side is lacking somewhat. But I'll give it a 6 out of 10. It's an above average kind of like possession movie. It's entertaining, it was well paced, and I thought well acted with likeable kind of characters who seemed, you know, somewhat kind of well defined. So that to me gives it a slightly above average score of a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.